So I'm not here to talk about any of that do-gooder bullshit. I'm talking about defending the indefensible. We have things we know are indefensibly wrong, and our instinct is to try and correct them and fix them, like all of you want to click on Start Presentation to begin this presentation. But that's actually a slide. That wasn't PowerPoint. I did this in Keynote. So the thing that I want to share with all of you is the idea that there are things that we think we hate that we don't necessarily have to hate, like Paris Hilton. So you think she's this indefensible scourge, an evil pop culture force, but the truth of the matter is she's far more interesting than you think she is, even with the vapid imagery. For example, she is part of a cohort of her cousins of that generation of the Hilton family, each of whom was eligible for a pretty sizable inheritance that they were able to reach when they reached maturity at age 18. She chose to put out a record, which is actually not terrible. The lead single, Stars Are Blind, sounds kind of like a Blondie outtake if Blondie couldn't sing. It could have actually just sounded like unts, 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 and it would have sold just as many copies, but she had the temerity to do something a little bit better. And as a result, she is the only member of her generation, the Hilton family, that is worth more than she inherited at age 18. And as inherited wealth is probably the most destructive force in the history of humanity, that actually means she is the least evil member of her generation of her family. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, is innocent. Now, if you read the GQ story in 1994 that talked about how it's being blackmailed, this is all recap. But for the rest of you that aren't me, I want to actually talk about why you think that Michael Jackson was guilty of molesting children. It's probably not true. First thing to understand about Michael Jackson is there is no point in the history of his life, his abbreviated life, where the people around him weren't either dependent on him for their income or trying to be dependent on him for their income. Every single person he ever met, including his family. And this guy's name is Evan Chandler. Evan Chandler is the father of the boy that accused Michael Jackson of molesting him in 1993. There were never any charges filed, and this guy actually had been trying to get Michael Jackson to fund his film, which was Robin Hood Men in Tights. That was the movie that he destroyed Michael Jackson's life for. His co-writer on it went on to be the writer on John Travolta's Battlefield Earth, the Scientology film. So the interesting thing is by the time Michael Jackson died, this information was all out there, and it wasn't that interesting. People had decided that they wanted to convict Michael in the court of public opinion. 3 months after Michael Jackson died, Evan Chandler killed himself. And there wasn't any coverage of it, but I thought it was a little interesting coincidence that he was kind of admitting his guilt. Tea Partiers. In this room, there's not going to be a lot of sympathy for them. However, I think we should be much more empathetic towards the Tea Partiers. There's a great defense for them. First thing to understand is they are reckoning with change. They're reckoning with massive cultural change. And what they're really trying to do is understand it and slow it down to where they can grapple with it, right? They don't have control of media and all the things that we can do as a lark where we can get press coverage for what we do. And they're not nearly as partisan as you think they are when you actually engage with them. I've had conversations. I haven't had a chance to go to the Tea Party meetups here in New York yet. But they really are just afraid of a system that they don't understand, that they feel disenfranchised from. And they are overwhelmingly white, right? And they do talk about taking back America, which means going back, in my case, to a time before my family was in this country. But what you find they're actually struggling with is a little bit the death of white privilege. Now, it's not completely gone, but they're saying it's not that a black man can be elected president of the United States. It's that a white man no longer will be, right? Barack Obama was the first time that the majority of white people voted for a candidate and they didn't win the presidency. How do you think this guy feels about having that control wrenched from his hands? And the least defensible thing in our culture, PowerPoint. I am a big believer in it. I think it has changed culture for the better. And I know this is an unpopular view, especially when people tried out examples of what would the Gettysburg Address have looked like if it were a PowerPoint presentation, right? And I actually grew up about 15 minutes from PowerPoint. And while there are certainly abuses of this technology, like, you know, in the Pentagon, I spent a lot of time in DC. People want to illustrate our strategy in Afghanistan, all the factors they have to put in. This is an actual slide they use within the Pentagon. Some of you might have seen in the New York Times. The truth is, though, this tool has taught us to think visually, has had people realize that images on the screen are something you can create. And all these examples where people felt disempowered, like the Tea Partiers, all they had to do was know this screen to know that they could simply click to add a title, and they too could be a creator. And that seems like a really powerful and empowering idea that PowerPoint brought to culture for them. So above all, I want you to think of all these times when you think somebody is wrong and indefensible and put a couple principles into play of empathy, take their perspective, follow the money and see who's profiting from exploiting them, and then base yourself on the facts, and maybe we can all be a little bit more empathetic towards the people we thought were indefensible. Thanks.